Welcome to a new week and a new episode of Tenet. I'm Todd Pearson here with my friend and partner, Wes Brown. How's it going, buddy?
Hey, Todd. Good, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm staying warm. You staying warm in South Dakota?
Well, barely. My God, it was cold this week. But, today was like, I think it was like 6. Yesterday was in the negatives. Thursday's supposed to be like 49. So I don't know. It's crazy, but that's the way it is. And for people who gives a shit, I got my truck back today. $1,600 later, but I got my truck back. So now we're fully vehicleized, whatever that is. And we're ready to roll. So just like the podcast, ready to roll.
All right. Well, if you listen to us on a regular basis, you know what we're all about. But if this is your first time joining us, listening to the podcast, we're the podcast that brings you something art related each and every week in the form of the artist, gallery, or museum profile. And we like to talk about the business of art and how artists are able to support and sustain an art life. We have some great episodes coming at you in the coming weeks with a variety of topics and artists. And this week we are traveling virtually to the beautiful city of Miami, Florida, to talk with artist and photographer Anastasia Samoylova. Anastasia is a Russian-American artist that moves between observational photography, studio practice, and installation. Her book, FloodZone, published in 2019 by Steidl, contains over 80 photographs and is a portrait and document of climate change in the southern states of the U.S. that are at risk from rising sea levels. Anastasia's work has been featured in a number of solo exhibitions in the past year, and FloodZone is currently on exhibit at the Sabrina Amrani Gallery in Madrid, Spain through April 3rd. You can check out her work at her website, anasamoylova.com. That's ANASAMOYLOVA.com. Anna, thank you so much for joining us this week. How are you?
Thanks for having me. I am keeping cool as much as I can. We've had power outage due to flooding just recently, so I'm the opposite of you right now.
Right now, I would take that because we're a lot of power outages around the country from Texas all the way up here because of extreme cold. So, yeah, I'd take the weather, I think.
It's happening.
What's the temperature there today?
I'm still Celsius. It's been 12 years in the States, but Fahrenheit is not transitioned fully. It's 26 Celsius.
Okay.
Nice.
It's hot.
And it's flooding, you said.
It is flooding. Yes, serious flooding. It flash flood today. There's a warning. I got it on my phone. The city of Miami Beach sends out a warning, for the kinds of streets to avoid, low-lying streets. I've seen several cars already definitely totaled by this. Yeah, and the motorcycle, I just downloaded my photos, but it was it's a very brief shoot. It's still very wet, and this is not the kind of water you want to get into for long periods of time.
So is this relatively new for Miami Beach, or is this something that's been happening for the last 10, 15 years or forever?
It's been happening. There are different kinds of floods. This is rain-caused flood, but when you add that to rising sea level, you have water coming in from the drains big time. And this is what I just witnessed, literally minutes ago. Yeah, I had to walk my 8 flights of stairs, and on the ground floor, there's water bubbling out, and this is salt. It's a mix of salt and fresh water bubbling out from the drains.
Wow.
All over, yeah, in garages, in the street, and that's what's causing real trouble.
Wow.
Which is crazy. How long have you lived in Miami?
It's been 4 years in Miami for me, since 2016. Yeah, 2016 is when I moved from Northeast, the Berkshires, and then Midwest prior to that, and then Moscow in 2008. That was a long journey.
Yeah.
Wow. You were born and raised in Moscow?
Yeah, I was born, I mean, technically you could say that, but it was in the South, and I moved as a small child to Moscow, and then Moscow till my 20s. So I moved when I was 24, I think 23, for graduate school. Yeah, very, very different climate than Miami. Different culture, obviously a different continent, just different world. Yeah. Did
you grow up in a creative family?
Not really. I mean, somewhat. Yes, my grandfather, whom I didn't get a chance to meet, was a writer, journalist. And my early childhood memory is sort of family reminiscing of all his accomplishments and bravery in particular, and guts to resist the pressure to use propaganda in his nonfiction books. So he was actually thrown into jail for that decision for 5 years. And, having that memory and growing up sort of amidst the imagery of, this budding, beautiful world that we are all building in Soviet Russia. That was a contrast. That was the first sort of confrontation with this reality that presents itself as perfect, ideal scenario for your future, while your relatives end up in jail for very reasonable behavior.
That's crazy to think that. I don't know. It's so crazy to think that goes on and has it. Well, it continues to go on in Russia to this day. And who knows? Maybe the United States is headed that way too at some point.
Never know.
I think we just evaded. could have gone that way, and I was quite panicky at times. Yeah, the freedom of speech is something that just carries so much weight for me. It's the most important thing for me as an artist too. There's no way I would have been able to do what I do with photography if I didn't have that right. And that's what's most precious for me in this country. And I just got naturalized. So a couple of weeks ago, I became a citizen.
Congratulations. That's amazing. Yeah. Where did you do the ceremony at?
In Miami.
In Miami? Yeah. A lot of other people there doing it at the same time?
Yeah. I'm the only sort of gringa, I don't know if I am. I learned really early on when I moved here that I have to learn Spanish now. I can't avoid it. So I have all my textbooks on my nightstand. That's my next language. I feel like I just barely mastered English and I have to learn Spanish now.
Well, I got to say your English is superb. It's impeccable.
Thank you.
Really. Like you'd never know, I don't think. Mm-hmm. So do you speak other languages besides English and Russian?
German, supposedly.
German? Okay.
Yeah. Took that in college.
And now you're working on conquering the Spanish language and putting that in your toolkit as well, huh?
Yeah, that's the goal. It's so melodic. And it's really, I really have no excuse not to learn it. I mean, there's so many places to practice. And that's what's beautiful about Miami. It's so eclectic, it's so diverse. When I was living in Northeast, I was the only person with an accent, let alone Midwest, the only person from somewhere else. But here you're just one of many that are from somewhere else.
No, that's awesome.
So you just recently got naturalized, became a citizen. What was that process like? Was it a pretty arduous process?
No, not as bad as I expected. I had to learn, memorize answers to 100 questions on history and law, legislature and structure, office, and so on. So I sort of did a crash course.
So the cool thing about that is you're more knowledgeable than about 50% of the Americans that were born here.
I think I was for about 2 weeks, And then it evaporates.
Yeah. Yeah, so I worked for a nonprofit that did civic education. So it was amazing just to see, and it's nobody. I mean, it's not really a fault. Just people don't remember that kind of stuff because you don't use it every day until something crazy like the Trump administration comes on. Then you're like, I wonder, is this constitutional? Let me look into this. Or how is the government not working like I thought it was going to work? Let me see when Mitch McConnell just says we're not going to even consider Obama's Supreme Court candidate. How does is that work? Is that how it, can they really do that? So anyway, yeah, until something like weird like those things happen, you kind of just take it for granted that everything's going to be the same as it always is. So having a perspective like from you coming from a country that, freedom of speech is not taken for granted, I would assume.
Not at
correct
all.
me.
No.
Yeah.
Yes. And in fact, I'm working on my next project. Well, they're all sort of parallel to each other. FloodZone is ongoing, and the other one is called Florida's. I'll talk about it later.
Yeah.
I mentioned that in the artist statement itself, freedom of speech. And like you said, knowing your rights, knowing what's constitutional, what's not, right? So like, how do you go from a term that was 4 years and all of a sudden it's 6 years? Who accepted that? And yet it could be 20 as well.
Right.
It's happening where I'm from.
It's an interesting thing, everything that's happening in Russia since the fall of the Soviet Union. And I'm no expert in it, but it's very fascinating what happens and everything. So it's kind of cool.
And I'm sure you know the situation with Alexei Navalny right now, and that I wonder when they'll translate that documentary that he shot, the Putin's Palace.
Yeah.
It was, I'll tell you, as a sort of like, and that's when you're in between. It's been 12 years, so it's already been, over a decade of my life. So I'm not quite the insider anymore. And you suspect all of those things, but seeing the evidence, this is the value again of journalism, of imagery. It still leaves you shocked and speechless after that film.
Yeah.
It took like a whole day to just simmer and unpack.
Yeah. I'd love to see it, and I'd need to see it with either English subtitles or dubbed in English, obviously. But that would be a very fascinating and I love documentaries, so that'd be a very fascinating documentary to watch. So I worry for him, and I think his wife is now. Did she flee to Germany, or is she still in Russia?
She's still in Russia, I think.
Is she? Okay. But it's really kind of cool to see how the people have kind of, are standing up, and, even just lighting our hearts over Valentine's Day in reference to him and I think is great that they're willing to stand up and be heard, and, and they're putting their lives on the line as well.
Yeah. The beginnings, those protests, it's really heartening, but also terrifying to see, because what could happen to those people and how little protection, and how little law they can expect.
Yeah.
So I got to ask you this. Have you been dismayed of what you've witnessed and seen the last 4 years and all the craziness with the whole storming of the Capitol? Did that affect you?
Of course. How did it not, right? But it's almost like too close to home. It started resembling things that I remember all too vividly. And for that reason, it was terrifying, because you could see how it could end so badly for all, how you could just lose that democracy forever. And it's a lot harder to restore it, I don't think we had any since like 900s. There were occasional glimpses of that, and by we I mean in Russia. But then, it was suppressed real quick.
Yeah, I was curious to get your perspective on it as from somebody that was born and raised in Russia, and how you felt about it. Yeah,
and of course, all these really suspicious revisions, some of them affected me on quite personal level. I arrived, my entire journey was legal and long. I arrived on student visa, and if it was now, I wouldn't have been let back in to the country, potentially. Like that was up for debate all of a sudden, with the pandemic, that F1 foreign students would not be let back into the country. And that was my case. I was F1 foreign student, studying on scholarship. And I would go back to visit my family, and I wouldn't have been let in, and it would have been a completely different life then.
Yeah.
Because I got a teaching position straight out of college, so I got my F1 visa, and then I got my H1B, so employee-sponsored visa, and then they applied for the green card. It's a long process, in retrospect, it was a total pain in the neck, but it was still worth it. But it could have been, cut short, and I would have been back and doing something else, not documentary or observational photography, for sure.
So how long did it take you from when you first applied for citizenship to receive your citizenship?
You can't even apply right away. You have to go through, a couple of visas and then green card, which is permanent residency status. And so I was what was called a resident alien. That was my status, which I thought sounded great. And I wanted to make a project about it, like walking around in an alien costume. An alien, it's really cumbersome with taxes. You have to pay extra. And so that was 5 years in that status. And prior to that, 2 visas, one based on your employer, and on your institution, so higher ed.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an arduous process and takes longer for some people than others. So, but once again, congratulations and welcome. And we're glad you're here. We, open armed.
Yeah, I can vote finally.
Yay.
Hey, that's awesome.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, thanks for sharing a little bit of that. I appreciate that. That's awesome.
So you have a formal arts education. You started your education and you went to university in Russia, correct?
Yes. And that one was environmental design. So that was my first degree. And we have this it's between bachelor's and master's. It's 5.5 years. And it was in environmental design. So in photography, I was self-taught, but it's quite classical, that kind of education. So it was 4 years of painting and drawing, architecture, building things by hand, sculpture, very traditional.
Wow.
Very well-rounded education. Did you see a difference between, well, he's shaking your head.
You could still slack off. We were.
Oh, and then what made you decide to follow up by coming to America and doing your graduate degree here?
Yeah, so we don't have MFA programs. There is a way to get your PhD in art history, but nothing sort of hands-on, no practice-based art degree of that level. So I researched some programs, and then this university in Chicago area offered me an assistantship because I was self-taught and quite versed in digital photography at the time. I had one of the earlier digital cameras, and I was so thrilled to just learn more about it. And I was one of the early Photoshop users. I think I had Photoshop 1 and then Photoshop 3, and it would take like half an hour to switch between tools. But I found it very meditative, like from brush to pencil, I would have to wait and then do some things. These are those kinds of days. But I loved it. And I loved being able to, frame and see my image on that little LCD screen. My first camera was, I think, Sony Alpha 707. I remember it vividly because it had incredible emerald green filters, those arrays that determine the colors. And mine were really intense. And so it's like a little psychotic, but a bit impressionist.
That's pretty neat that you adopted digital so early in this process.
And that was the whole story there. I had my film camera to do some assignments. And then I think I was starting to get some gigs. Anyways, I would just try to get any kind of commissions I could. But my focusing on, film camera, I'm just not a film person. I realized it very quickly. And then I was still in my teens, and my mom took out a loan And I remember it was $1,000, which is astonishing sum of money at the time. So I think it's early 2000s, and in Russia, rubles. Anyways, it was a lot of money. So she was paying off that loan for a year, and then I was contributing, but I was using the digital camera, and then rest is history.
So you got your MFA at Bradley University?
Yeah.
So where's Bradley at?
This is in Peoria, Illinois.
Okay. And is it a fine arts school?
No, it's comprehensive. They're known for their engineering. This is Peoria is where Caterpillar headquarters are, heavy machinery.
Yep.
So they're known for their engineering and business, but they had actually fantastic facilities for the art students. They had an entire separate building. There was a fine art program, and they were quite well funded. I got full assistantship, and it's a private university, so I could teach digital photography, and then in exchange, my degree was free, and I got all kinds of other little perks. I get to assist, college photographer. And life was cheap in Peoria, so I highly recommend for international students coming in to find a smaller town. Don't chase some sort of famous, expensive program. You can make it work, And I felt like I was contributing too. And I taught for that entire time, 3.5 years. I taught digital photography and Photoshop.
Nice.
Did you enjoy that?
Yeah, it was crazy. I arrived with a major language gap, of course. My English is from my public school. All schools were public in Russia, and so this is from my elementary and middle school. High school, I skipped over. I did something there, and then I took German. So I arrived, it was a 5.5 year break between me ever actually practicing English, and I had to dive into art theory, and photo history. And actually learn darkroom photography so I could teach darkroom photography. So I felt like a digital native person, but thankfully I was already really good with digital technology. So that came naturally to me, and I taught it with excitement. And I was 24, and my students were 22. It was not easy to exercise authority, especially when it came to grading afterwards, my least favorite activity, teaching. But I still enjoy it. I quit since actually 4 years ago, since I moved to Miami. But I really enjoy giving talks and doing critiques with the students. Those are great exchanges of ideas. Yeah.
I think it's really spectacular that your mom was willing to take out that kind of a loan to support you in your creative endeavor, right? That she saw that you had this interest, and that was like a huge catalyst, I imagine, right there in your development as a photographer.
Yeah, definitely. I'm forever grateful for that, and it's that she saw the dedication, I think. And the drive, and I would just sit all night photoshopping and playing with whatever, framing, exposure, whatever I could do with my really slow computer, but with scanned images or other people's images. It was always around images, but I never got into classical photography programs, so I just picked it up.
From getting your MFA, you went ahead and taught at 2 other places as well. Is that correct?
Yeah. So when I graduated, I was recruited by another college, actually in the same town. Interestingly, one of the professors was a graduate student whom I taught, and it was a great exchange there. So they hired me to run that program, photography program within the fine art department at a college, Illinois Central College. And this was a community college. So I'm a big proponent, excited about the current administration and its affiliation with community colleges. And I had students from all over. It was fascinating, mainly non-majors. I had welders and nurses, And our brainstorming sessions were just spectacular. So it was a lot of fun to teach there. It was challenging, of course. There were complaints sometimes. Why am I spending so much time on this class? As much as I'm spending on math, it shouldn't be this way. This was supposed to be well, I said, nobody promised it's going to be easy. Just because it's photography doesn't mean that, with good photograph, the standards are high. Just because there are more photographs out in the world doesn't mean that they're better. Just because there are more of them, right? It hasn't actually elevated the medium. The discipline of study, photography. So, and then I moved to Northeast and taught at Bard College at Simon's Rock. And that's where I enjoyed it tremendously, but realized that it can't go on that way. And what I really want to do is make my own work. And I barely can afford to do that, considering, undergraduate teaching, which is 5 days a week, 3 load, and all the advising, administrative work that teaching requires, especially on undergraduate level. So I was just burned out, and this was a major risk to quit. But I felt like there's no way, and both of my jobs were tenure track. I actually got tenured in Illinois, and then I left that for Bard, and that was also tenure track. And I thought this is sort of like a suicide move, but but then if not now, then when? It's
right.
One of those. Yeah.
And most people most professors are dying to be on a tenured track. The state of higher education now, they do a lot of associate professors, so they don't have to, they can keep the salaries down. And so have an opportunity to be on a tenured track and then have it twice, that's pretty fortunate. Compared to a lot of other teachers or professors that I even know, let's say in South Dakota, that, they're working and they're not even on a tenure track. So, kudos for you for having two opportunities. And, it's a scary jump to leave that kind of security behind, even though maybe the pay wasn't where you wanted to be. And, and obviously you wanted to work on your own projects and not given the time. So kudos for you, though.
Yeah, it's one of those, it's kind of having moved here, it was also a moment like that where I actually already had a very decent job in sort of high fashion interior design. But with my environmental design degree, I was working for this like luxury Italian brand and traveling to Milan and Paris and doing fairs. And that was early 20s. And that was, again, a leap. What's that word? It was that expression, leap of faith to the United States to become a student again, And I thought, well, this is crazy. But if not now, then when? And I'll probably regret not doing it. And this was the same thing. The salary was standard. My colleagues were wonderful. My students were great. But I was exhausted and I was not doing what I really wanted to be doing. I enjoy teaching, but there's so much time that goes into pedagogy and not as much into actually your discipline and research. And that's what I was primarily interested in. And of course, practice. And that's a time sucker.
Yeah. So I got a question. What in you allows you to be somebody that's willing to take that leap of faith? What resides within you? Because I'm always hesitant to take the leap of faith. I'm always kind of falling back on what seems to be safe at the moment. So I'm just wondering, what about you?
Yeah, good question. And I was listening on the long drive yesterday. I was shooting in Key West, and there's another podcast about Stoics, and the philosophy of Stoics, and how you really shouldn't be too crazy, too risky. So one of the philosophers, it wasn't Plato, it was somebody else with unpronounceable name. It wasn't Aristotle. Epictetus. That's what it was. Epictetus. It shouldn't be too crazy, but you shouldn't be playing too safe. So you sort of have to be in between for your harmony in life. But you can't play too safe, otherwise you won't be happy, right? You have to risk it a little. So I think that's what it's been. When I felt like I'm too, what's the word, sort of complacent, I'm too comfortable, I gotta push it. Yeah.
Well, and Aristotle taught, about eudaimonia is the place in between, like, let's say, courage and foolhardiness, because you can be too courageous or not courageous enough. If you're foolhardy, you're willing to take that jump, and it's dangerous for you. But you need to have courage as well, so that happiness, according to Aristotle, is eudaimonia, right? Is the mid place. Yeah. So anyway, I love philosophy. So
the terrible memory, terrible memory. So
I got a speech comm degree, which is really a degree in rhetoric. So we studied a lot of Plato and Marcus Aurelius and Aristotle and Kant, and so anyway, so that was fun.
I'm jealous. If there's one degree I could add, and who knows, maybe that will happen. It would be that one for sure. Yeah. But I have terrible memory, so that's why I'm a photographer. I can't remember anything.
Well, maybe that's why I have a horrible memory.
So I want you to tell our listeners, Anna, what kind of projects that you've been involved with in the last 10, 12 years?
Yeah, so my most current ones are the Floridas, or my Florida project, and the FloodZone. There's another one called Landscape Sublime, and another really fun one called Breakfasts With. So all of those are photography-based projects, sort of image-based. I don't really think of myself as a straightforward, photographer. I just about got over my imposter syndrome with photography. My beginnings are so different. But I'm very thankful for those years when I had to teach photography and actually photo history, because there was nobody available around to teach photo history. So even though I'm really not qualified, I'm not supposed to, and not PhD, but I studied so much and I learned a lot in photo history, and that's the one I miss teaching most. So Breakfasts With, a little playful project, is actually when I left academia, I could finally have my breakfast in the morning because I didn't have a really early class. So I would flip through, but I wanted to continue my education. I think that's what you also miss a lot when you leave academia, right? It's constant, stimulation of your brain. So this had to be kind of organized. Without the deadlines, pressure from the students. And I would flip through my collection of photography books, get new ones from the library. And so try to sort of soak it all up while having my cup of coffee and a little breakfast. So I could actually sit down and flip through a book. And then I started photographing my little breakfasts on top of photo books and sharing them, on my Instagram. And people really responded, and then somebody reached out wanting prints, and then a gallery reached out wanting prints, and now it's a project, So I'm hoping to find a publisher that will send me more books, because I ran out of books. And then I will continue having breakfasts and make an illustrated anthology of photo books. So that's one thing. Then Landscape Sublime was a project, again, sort of coinciding with teaching non-majors, and speaking of philosophy, analyzing our aesthetic categories, the beautiful, the picturesque, and the sublime, right? And as somebody who comes from a different culture, with language gap, how images can communicate, especially those principles across all cultures, like you could argue about, portrayal of a person. I remember interviewing for a job, and it was in Islamic country where there's sort of a ban. You're not supposed to photograph people, especially, in like assignments with students. And I thought, how interesting, culturally it communicates severe invasion of somebody's privacy and other things, I won't get into because I don't know all the levels. But then something like flowers, mountains, landscape, or whatever other natural phenomena could be universally accepted as beautiful or picturesque or sublime if it's something so grand. So that's one layer of it. And then the proliferation of images shared online. I was one of the early users of Flickr. Remember before Instagram, there was Flickr.
Yeah.
A lot fewer selfies on that one. So it was mainly actually people sharing views of, of nature, of travels, or a lot fewer cats and pets as well. So I thought it was more of like a amateur photography sharing community. And there were categories on Flickr for different genres, still life or landscape. So at some point, I started noticing how, the certain filters, like algorithms, point our attention to a specific kind of imagery. So the kind of imagery that gets through those algorithms are like highly perfected, idealized calendar kind of images. And as again, like early Photoshop user, I started looking deeper into the kinds of tools that were used, intensification of color and like a shift in hues in the sky. And so it was like a quasi-scientific method, but really curious about those algorithms. Because to me, again, what reaches our attention through myriads and myriads of images, a lot of them looking very similar, right, is worth paying attention to. And our attention is currency, and now we know it with more sophisticated, advanced image sharing websites, platforms like Instagram, right, where there's always some kind of advertisement that will pop up, and how it studies, right, the kind of images you pause on and the images that get your attention. So it's sort of very sophisticated now. And all of that combined, so calendar images, image sharing of the images of the same kind, right? How many times we've photographed, rainbows and they continue to be photographed, or flowers, right? Zillions of flowers, and yet people continue to photograph that and add to this pool of imagery. Teaching my students and looking at what drew their attention, what they found worth photographing, especially non-art major students, people who are coming into it just, for the first time, having experience with art forms. Yeah, so thinking deeply about imagery, the kind of imagery that we deal with and are exposed to on a daily basis, right? We're image-heavy culture, right? Images are everywhere. And that led me to this project where I would gather photographs that are user shared, not copyrighted. Interestingly, there are so many images of the same kind, right? How many images of trees are there? They're no longer necessarily copyrighted. People are actually voiding their copyright, their authorship, and letting those images out there's a license called Creative Commons, where you can not only look at the image, but also use it. It implies that you can use it in some way as a designer or as whatever product placement. So this sort of commodification of an image, the pictured thing, especially with landscape, I found it particularly puzzling, something that's essentially non-obtainable, how it get commodified and like placed on a product to advertise, sparkling water, whatever. So that's a lot that got condensed into this project called Landscape Sublime. I would print out those images that I gathered, and then I would reconstitute a new environment out of them, and then I would rephotograph them. And so I've been doing that in the studio for 7 years.
You continue to do that?
Yeah. And I expanded that. So they have become bigger. Actually, one of your visitors on the podcast, Dennis Scholl, was among the people who encouraged a commission that I've done for a public art project. And that was in 2018, one of those sublimes, I call them, called Four Seasons. And so there's a calendar type imagery based on those seasons, the most cliche things you can imagine, but yet there are comforting, for people, especially in a setting where public art is displayed. Like this one is at a hospital where you sit for many hours, potentially in the waiting room, and then you can just sort of meditate on those semi-abstract forms. But yet when you come closer, they become recognizable, those images. They're like horses in snow and flowers blooming and the mountain valleys and so on, like representations of summer, palm trees and water and so on. Yeah, so there's irony. It can't be taken at face value. It's sort of semi-abstract. On the formal level, it kind of resembles Cubist painting. It's not a very linear project, it's sort of thoughts manifested in visual form.
It's absolutely brilliant. Every single one of these series, I'm just blown away by the thought and the way that you see the world and what goes into each one of them. I love the breakfast series. I can totally relate to that. That's an easy one, right? That's an easy sell.
Yeah.
But beyond just seeing, who you're highlighting with those conversations during breakfast, I'm amazed by the way that you lay out things. Your still life is just impeccable. And in the course of that series, you highlighted some of my favorite photographers, Irving Penn, Horst P. Horst. I'm trying to think of who else was in there that really jumped out at me. Cartier-Bresson, of course. It's a brilliant series, and I love it. I love what you've done with it. And is that a series you're continuing with as well?
Yeah, I am. So far, did not get into any trouble, and it's one of those where there's enough of my intervention into that composition, the original composition, where I think it makes it fair use, and again, I got into this project to express my enthusiasm really about those artists that, it's an homage rather than an appropriation for me. It's sort of, it was startling to me at one point in one of my classes, beginning of the year, where I was showing some of those photographers to my students, to me, completely iconic artists, that everybody has to know. And then some of the photography students couldn't recognize any of them. So that history is lost to them. They have Tumblr, right? They have Instagram, and that's simply not what pops up, So again, speaking of those algorithms, I feel like they've subverted some of the better things in culture, right? And sort of took the low brow too low. Yeah. So like this whole chunk of history is completely omitted. And it's worth revisiting. So by placing my little, hilarious cup of coffee in this like perfectly Instagram perspective from above, with carefully arranged objects, I'm trying to sort of infiltrate those algorithms again, and have this history pop up with my little, whatever, strawberries and cute arrangements. So it's a very conscientious act. Yeah.
It's phenomenal. And I got to say, I love the fact that you're so engaged with the evolution of photography and the history of photography, and that you have a connection to the what I consider the masters. One of the things that really bothers me about the digital age, and I don't have any problem, with digital photography. What I do have a problem with is that nobody takes the time to look at some of these masters, some of their works, flip through photo books, and like you said, it's all done online. And like you also said, it kind of gets omitted from the equation, from the conversation. Do you think if you had not been in a position where you had to teach the history, do you think you'd be as interested, or have always had an interest in the masters or the history of photography?
I did. I've always had interest. And because I was self-taught in photography, I would just find my own resources. But of course, I wish I had more navigation there. Back in Russia, I discovered, Avedon and Ansel Adams. This for me was sort of the epitome of American photography. And then only when I arrived here, I learned more about Stephen Shore, and Deanna Arbus. So many, right? Yeah. And then, of course, we have Germans, that whole school. In terms of history, and besides forgetting it, this omission, this sort of lack of depth sometimes in practitioners, that you see in contemporary practitioners photography, can lead to, I think, some rather evil things, like really derivative work where you could point directly to somebody who's been producing images exactly like that, right? It's like a few decades, not even such long history, and bring up that question, how some things just get replicated verbatim and never mentioned.
I'm very fascinated with, and Todd knows this, with art appropriation. And I'm glad you kind of said homage, because, art appropriation is a big thing now. And it has been probably since the beginning of art. But in fact, I just read an article about fair use. And it's, the scary thing about fair use is it's really up to the judge if it gets that far. And we're talking somebody that doesn't necessarily even know the ins and outs of art are making decisions about whether this is, a stolen item that, then they can prosecute or make you take down. I find it completely fascinating where those lines are. And it's so, and people don't know. People think they know what fair use is, but a lot of times they don't. I'll listen to local radio station commercials and they're playing Pink Floyd. And it's just like, are you kidding me? That's definitely, you can't, unless you're paying Pink Floyd, you can't use their music, right? And images like what you're showing, you're nodding to an homage, but it's really kind of that gray area. Definitely. So it's really fascinating. Yeah. And I'm glad that you're pushing the envelope, because I think people need to, and that's where like Warhol was brilliant. He's willing to push that envelope of what art appropriation is, using an image of Elvis Presley or Marilyn Monroe, and then putting his likeness on it. Where is that line? And the article I was reading was actually a photograph of Miles Davis, and it was an album cover, and he got hammered in the courts, and he took the photo, the original photo, and then he pixelized it more and more until it was just a big square of color, right? And he said, and his point was, where's the line? Where's the line where I can use an image in fair use, and where is it? But he got hammered, and he was forced to take it down because in the process of it, he showed the original image. So it's interesting, and I find it very fascinating. I love and I'm with Todd. I love that breakfast series, and you're pushing that envelope a little bit. And I like that.
Yeah, it can be interpreted in different ways. It's not my most sort of serious work, and I'm fine with however it gets interpreted. To me, the message is clear. There are some, there's like a bit of a subversion of the canon, some of those monumental figures in photography are predominantly men, and so I'm in a way kind of domesticating them a little bit by turning those iconic images into sort of placemats that we share over breakfast, which is a very intimate and chill meal of the day, right? So there are those things there too. But then I did just recently a series of plates with those breakfasts, and those were specifically with overlooked, as always, women photographers. And that was a bit of a meta. That was also an homage to Judith Chicago and her dinner with, the dinner setting with women artists. So mine had women photographers, but it was a breakfast with a group of us. Yeah. And so, but with appropriation, a lot less gray and a lot harder to emulate observational photography, right? When it's all about the subject, it really is all about the subject. So with my project FloodZone in Florida, that was another huge leap for me, and one of those pushing myself, into a very unfamiliar territory. And that was, essentially documentary. So lyric documentary, street photography, out in the streets, zero staging, just walking around and trying to observe. Yeah. And so breakfasts were, I think, part of the transition. So I would look at some books and I would get inspired and go out and shoot. Yeah. And there are some very, very obvious nods to photographers throughout FloodZone. There's this covered car, And, the motif itself is associated so strongly with Robert Frank, right? His covered car. There are some of my silhouette reflections like Lee Friedlander, so there are nods all throughout. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So you have these nods, but at the same time, you have a very unique voice. And I got to say that I've looked at a lot of photography, being a photographer myself. I have a ton of photography books. I love the practice of actually having something physical that you look through. And it's funny because before we did this interview, I'd already made, because I have all these great books, but I don't necessarily always pull them down. So in the last week, I put into play where at least an hour a day, I sit with one of these books and kind of just flip through them and look at the imagery and kind of, kind of refresh my palette a little bit. And I love that you do the same thing and that you've made a series out of it. And it's multi-leveled. That's what I love about your work. There's a bunch of stuff that's happening subtly underneath the surface, and you could read a multitude into these things. And just like all art, on all great art, it resonates differently with different people, right?
Yeah, that was the goal, and with what you mentioned with sitting down with those books. I remember at some point, I think it was starting writing or trying to just theorize one of the projects. It was like research and putting some notes down. And I thought, well, you can't be a good writer if you're not a good reader. You have to read a lot, right, to be able to write. And the same with everything. And with photography, there's this visual memory, right? There's this visual literacy that you just have to practice on a daily basis. And it's between, there's this acuity of vision, right? When you, I don't know, Todd, if you get into that flow, or I know for sure when I get into it, and it's like, it's not guaranteed. You have to get into that mode where you're just so present and you're so in the moment and your vision is so acute and just tuned in to all the minutia, in my case, with FloodZone, of that daily life. Because it's the everydayness that really interests me with these two projects, the Florida and FloodZone, to make it interesting, right, and worth looking at for the viewer. It has to be the right choice of subject. I'm a very low-tech person. They're rarely, you can say that the images are, all that beautiful. Like really, it's really all about framing the subject in the most interesting way. And so I started looking at a lot of books. So it's between practicing that visual, acuity and visual literacy by just looking at enough of really good photography, because there's a lot of bad photography out there, especially on social media. I think that's part of the reason why it's so hard for photographers these days to get into it. There's just a lot of garbage out there, and it all gets blended. It's mixed, it's cats and everything else.
I concur. I think you're right on the money. There's plenty of fantastic photography out there too, but it just gets lost in the whole stream of, social media feeds and that sort of thing. And there's tons. We had this conversation with a gentleman a few weeks back, Carl Corey, who's a Guggenheim fellow in photography and has some really cool, it would be nice to have him on this podcast, because I feel like you guys, even though you could do different work, you're kindred souls, and you definitely, the way you see things is very interesting. Anyway, I digress. The way he sees things is unique. The way you see things is unique. And I think we had this conversation with him, and that it's been diluted. Photography has been diluted because it's been, brought to the masses. Everybody has a phone. Everybody has, a cheap digital camera, and even the cheap digital cameras and the phones take amazing photographs, right? But there's no sense of that history that we were talking about, that thread that runs through all those masters into the current realm of photography, I think.
Yeah, yeah. But what I find fascinating about photography, and again, I came into it fairly late in my, yes, I don't know what it's called, trajectory as an artist. Career. I hate the word career. Like I studied art, and then I am now in photography very excitedly. What led me to it is that it's always in between, that gray zone, that gray sort of obscure area where it can be art, but it's also this utilitarian, applied medium that can be used to sell things, right? Or to document science, right? To serve as evidence. It has all these other uses. And my favorite part is when it jumps in between. It can be this, it can be that, it can be art. I hate images that are way too arty. They're like obvious attempts at art, right? And then I most respond to images that could serve as a number of things. And that's what I'm trying to accomplish with my work. Here's a little anecdote. I remember, again, back when I was a graduate student, I was asked to jury a contest. And it was in Peoria. I don't remember what organization, but there was one photograph, and I'll never forget that. And I had other jurors, I've never met them. One woman who was older, and I remember that debate got quite heated at some point. And then we were judging this photo, so the selection, and then one of them that was her pick was like this lion in the zoo. And I was startled. I was like, well, this is a zoo lion. Why would we pause and discuss and spend our precious, time? And what can be said about, a very kind of close up, we're not even talking, who was it? Winogrand, who did Zoo Animals. It was a Friedlander. I'm blanking out. Winogrand, right?
Gary Winogrand.
Yeah, it was a Winogrand. Anyways, he did the whole series of Zoo Animals in New York, Central Park Zoo. But so this is like a close-up of the lion. And then I say, but it's a lion in the zoo. How easy can it get? It's just a lion. And it's a zoo lion close-up. And she said, but you can see every hair on his mane. Do you not understand? You can see every hair on this lion's mane. Look how incredible and crisp this image is. And I realized to each their own. And that's the great part about photography, and very confusing part too.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So, do you think photography as artwork, does it sell as well as like fine art as far as paintings and sculpture, or is it too utilitarian to appeal to the art collector?
Oh, well, it's still very much proving itself. It's in the editions sector, right? And all those fairs. So it's like the lowest on the hierarchy, but people in the know, I think truly modern people understand photography and what it means in terms of our culture, how integral it is, how it's just part of our fabric as society of photography. That's the one thing that is not separate whatsoever, and not, exclusive and sort of this bougie art medium, but it's part of life. So in terms of sales, I can't speak for the collectors. I'm doing fine, surprisingly. So even with the current series, FloodZone, I remember the gallery that I had in New York said, this is never going to sell, and you should not do this project. When they signed me on with Landscape Sublime, which is, I guess, a slightly more art looking. And then with FloodZone, they said, this is absurd. Don't do this. And it turned out to be very well received. To my surprise, every time I'm surprised when my work is received well, and anybody's paying attention. So
that's interesting. Yeah. And so a lot of times the experts don't know shit.
And again, to each their own.
Right. You gotta follow your own path. You got to be authentic to yourself.
Yeah.
No, I love your work. I mean, I've been scrolling through while we've been talking your different projects, and I love your work. You definitely have, like Todd said, a very unique eye, and so I dig it.
Yeah, it's just sort of a thought process expressed, through photographs. Because I realized with Landscape Sublime, and I wanted to get it out of my system. You could accomplish certain results if you wanted to, right? Especially with commercial photography, like you could get that prettiest picture ever, but what reward does it carry with it? Does it make you think? That's always, my goal.
And that's an interesting statement, Todd. And I'm going to stop you because you look like you were going to say something.
I think you're going to say what I was going to say.
I like what you just said, though. When I shoot, I do a lot of landscapes and other stuff. But when I'm shooting, I'm always trying to say, what am I trying to say? And I like the way you said it. Does it make you think? And I haven't thought about it in that kind of a simple twist. It's the same thing, but it means a totally different thing. And so I'm going to borrow that because I think I need to think about that and not about what am I trying to say. So I appreciate the fact that you said that, because I'm always, and Todd is probably bored with this question. I ask people all the time. So, when I look at your image, what am I supposed to convey from it? What am I supposed to conjure up? And I'm always looking at myself, my own art, and saying, what am I trying to convey here? And maybe I'm probably putting too much burden on myself when I think that way, but I definitely like the way you phrased it. And I think that's more important.
In my case, I don't really know what I'm trying to say. Most of the time, I have no idea. I have a cluster of thoughts and ideas, but usually it's a number of responses, right, to the situation in front of you, right, to whatever, however life unfolds, creates thoughts and feelings too. And so it's an expressive medium for me. And I'm not, even with FloodZone, the name is quite descriptive, right? The title is quite descriptive. But it's so far from didacticism. It's not telling you any answers about the issue. My hope, it brings up more question and makes you look further. That's the aim, makes you look for answers and dig deeper, not necessarily into the photograph, but outside into the world, in search of those answers. Yeah. That's
brilliant. I love it.
A lot of your artwork I would consider pretty bold. What do you consider? I stole Wes's thunder. What do you consider being bold?
Boy, well, I don't know. To me, I think it's pretty subtle. I'm not sure I would describe it as bold. The word I would use is probably, I will mispronounce it. It's one of those where I read it and I love that word. It's laconic. Am I saying it right?
Laconic.
It's reduced amount of clutter. Because with painting, which I've done and I enjoyed, and one day I'll do it again, you add, right, to this blank canvas. With photography, it's the art of reduction, right, of selection. It's all about reducing the clutter to what's most important, right? Mm-hmm. And it's laconic in this sort of small palette, so to say. I think that's where the most interesting things happen. And if it looks bold, then great. But to me, it's just being very, very careful with my selections. And with observational photography, unlike with my studio work, my sort of, success ratio, air quotes, is very low. It's astonishingly low. And I was agonizing over it for years until I started actually researching other observational, very known observational photographers, paths and processes, like Stephen Shore, who drives around for days and hours and whatever, weeks, and gets one picture, right? So it's the art of selection. I could walk around for hours and shoot 600 frames. Thank goodness for digital technology. And then choose maybe one, not guaranteed.
I think that's what people don't realize about photography is that they're under the impression that you just go out and you're such a great photographer. You can just walk out your door right now and make a phenomenal photograph. It may happen, but more than likely you got to hunt that photograph down, right? That's why I always feel when you're talking, if you're working out on the street and doing street photography, you're hunting photographs. You're in tuned, you're looking around all the time. Sometimes you think, oh, this is a great photograph. And you look at it later and you're like, maybe not so great, right?
Absolutely. All the time. I have just right now in front of me, 400 from a day in Key West for my Florida project. And I already scrolled several times. And there's maybe 2 that I would keep, and then I have to separate from them for about a week and then revisit. So it's really the art of editing. I think if you find a trusted editor, that's key to your success as a photographer.
So do you have an editor then that you work with that helps you cull through these photographs and choose the ones that you think really resonate and work?
Yeah, and that's where, again, and that's another thing they don't teach you in art school, right? Is it's not ever going to be a sort of solo career, like far from that. I very much value my solitude when I'm shooting. I'm in my mode, I'm talking to myself, I'm a total crazy person, and I don't care. I'm having the best time, I'm present, this is my meditation, it's my excitement. It's the best, the process itself. And it's agony at the same time, and when you download that shoot and there's nothing happening and you're devastated and you just wasted, whatever days. But then curators are the ones that help you make selection for an exhibition. A book editor is somebody who helps you make selection for a book, which is a very different, product or object outlet altogether than an exhibition. Right? A gallery exhibition is different from a museum exhibition, and each one comes with a curator. So in my life, I have these trusted people I go to whom I show my images, and that help me make those selections. The initial selection is mine, but there are way too many. And then when I revisit them, and sometimes there are surprises that I thought weren't that great, but then somebody believed in it, and then it becomes one of the key images. Yes, I'm very collaborative.
The interesting thing, going back to, shooting a bunch of images or, being on the hunt for, and like I said, I'm a landscape photographer. So I'm always hunting the subject and waiting for light. Right. Mm. And so you can shoot 400 images, you can shoot 1. The hunt is the same, it's your process, but I'm waiting for the moment. I'm looking for the right position. I may not be shooting a ton of images from different perspectives. I kind of select that, but I'm always on the hunt. It's the same process. I'm just maybe in a certain situation shooting less images. When I was shooting film, even sports photography, when I was shooting film, I had 12 frames per roll or maybe 24. And so I would pre-focus because I didn't have an automatic focus. I was doing everything manual. So I'd pre-focus on, let's say, on the basketball hoop. And I would wait for that moment because I knew it was coming because I'd watch these players and I would wait for that moment and then it would happen. And so it's just a different kind of hunt, but it's the same principle. And I love what you're saying. You go out and you're hunting, you're taking different images, and then it's the process of elimination, finding that one image of all that you shot or the 2 images. And I love that pride. It's the same thing. I love it. I'd love to hang out with you and just go shoot. Todd and I has done a couple, we've had our Wes and Todd's Great Adventures, and it's just a hoot. But to going out with you and just observe what you're doing and just be a part of that would be just a blast.
Yeah, I enjoy photo walks. I've done a couple of those. There's still, there's quite an investment emotionally, because when you're, it's one thing for me to go in my bubble, which is like, I feel like I become unnoticeable. Although sometimes with portraits, it's a different mindset. With portraits, there's always a rapport for me. I could never do a paparazzi style, gotcha or whatever. There's always an eye contact, like the person knows that I'm photographing them. There's sometimes the small talk, and sometimes people ask me to take their photo, and I love those. And actually, a few of those are keepers in like my book and my next project, where people stop me and ask, well, can you take my photo? And then you have to wait for like the initial, the fun response. But then, like you said, light is of utmost importance, right? And so you have light, you have subject, all those things have to align. In Florida, by about 10 a.m., it's already blasting sun, right? It's already like pitch black shadows, and you have to work early in the morning, so you only have this many hours, or you have to overcome, this really intense, harsh daylight, which sometimes you just don't have a choice. Sometimes the location is too important. And, I do this professionally now. So for me, it costs me, right, to be somewhere, to be on that spot and to get as much as I can out of it. And so like, there's no return. You have to get something. And then you're shooting in this blasting daylight. So you have to like work around that, find subjects that could still work in that light, certainly not portraits, maybe some details. So and then I have this sort of mental list. I don't quite put it on paper, unlike this, Walker Evans, whom I'm referencing a lot in the Florida project. But I have this mental list of subjects that I'm interested in. So I try to find them. But other than that, it's not very scripted. Like there's really no script to my photography. It's just walking around.
What do you enjoy more of all the different projects? You obviously enjoy them all to a certain extent, but do you enjoy just being unencumbered with a camera and just walking about and finding those photographs?
Yes, very much so. Very much so. That's, I like the toggle between observational photography that is so challenging, right? I mean, it's hot where I'm, it's very hot to the point where my, glass will fog up and I am literally just drenched in sweat. Like it's disgusting. It's so hot and exhaustion, you have to carry around all this. I only have 3 lenses, but they're already heavy enough. I'm using this DSLR and there's constant like this gear on me and it's all cumbersome. And so you walk through all of that. It just like push on. It's physically exhausting, of course. Mentally, it's tiring too. So it's a very, very intense process. And I can only do about 4 days or like 4 full days of that, after which I need to chill and just edit and not like come out of my room. And the studio is wonderful. And Landscape Sublime is actually very, very animated project because I don't script or sketch anything. I print out, I set the object or run back to my camera. It's sort of like animation. I run back and forth until the composition is complete. And I dance around the studio, which is AC'd, it's cool enough. It's lovely. And I do some commissions. There's another one coming up with this project. But I'm mainly doing Florida because, again, the number of successful images is so much lower with this process. There's a lot of walking, many, many hours until you get the image. With studio photography, I'm pretty much guaranteed the image in a day or two.
2 totally different processes.
Very.
I think where your boldness comes from is your vision. Like you do all these things very well. And I know that it's work but your vision and the way that you think, that's where the boldness comes from, I think, in your work. What I love too, I can see the thread, obviously, when they're all together. I can see that, there's a little bit of you in each one of these, right? But if I was to show these different series to other individuals and not relate that they were done by the same photographer, I don't know that they would get that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And one day, I hope there's going to be this smart curator who's going to put together all those projects into one big survey show. You know how they discover women artists in their 80s. So I'm waiting.
The retrospective?
Yeah, I'll take a survey. Hopefully my 60s, my prime 60s would be nice. So until then, yeah, and I remember showing this project and the transition from Sublime, from the tableaus, which, there's zero Photoshop in Landscape Sublime project. It mimics Photoshop. I'm sort of very playful with the tools of Photoshop, but there's no Photoshop. The whole thing is put together in space. It's three-dimensional, right? So transitioning from that, and I was getting some press with this project. And I started it in Peoria, in my basement. This is, again, a thought process, outpouring, building, those sets. And then the New Yorker reached out of nowhere. I had no contacts whatsoever in the New Yorker, and then Foam, some other magazine. And so there's this press coming in and people were interested in the work. And then Miami and FloodZone. And to me, it was a challenge. It's like, can anything new be said in observational photography? And knowing who I am, first show I saw in Miami was Berenice Abbott, Route 1. It's like a long road trip and a woman photographer, and I do find myself occasionally in quite tricky, risky situations where, I'm a girl walking around with a camera alone, in all kinds of neighborhoods. And it's not always safe, for instance, so besides that factor, a woman occupying this public space, photographing, but you can photograph in a public space in the United States. So that's fantastic. Led me to try this project. And when I started showing it to those editors who I knew and the galleries and, giving talks, people were so confused. Very much, some said, well, you're sabotaging your emerging career, as an artist. So you're known for this work. You can grow it, make it three-dimensional, do this. Some people kind of never pulled back and never ever written about this new body of work, and never sort of paid attention to what I do after I started FloodZone. But of course, now 4 years into it, I'm completely fine with this project and the kind of reach it had. I'm shocked, honestly, that it's been shown in multiple cities in Europe. It's not only now in Madrid, it's opening in Amsterdam next week. Last year was shown in Frankfurt, and all of these are solo exhibitions. It's in Vienna currently in an institutional show, and the next book is being published in Germany. So it's doing fine. But if I sort of freaked out back then and stopped, none of this would be happening. So, yeah.
That's the boldness right there. Yeah. I love the way you compose things. It's very clean photography. I look at your photography and that always resonates with me because you kind of alluded to it earlier when you were talking about, subtracting things to get down to the actual, distill it down to the very essence of what it's supposed to be, right? Talk about who some of your favorite female photographers are. Oh, I don't know if it's necessarily gender specific. Well, Berenice Abbott, I mean, Florence Henry, it's a big range. Hannah Höch, who's a collagist, Bauhaus, and then women painters. Olga Popova, the Russian avant-garde, those amazing women painters of the Russian avant-garde were as much of an influence for me as
photographers. The sort of main figure for my next project is Walker Evans and his reduced palette, so to say. Framing is so important, and I'm so glad you noticed that. It's the biggest compliment from you, really, because it's a total pain. It's framing. I go through many frames with one subject. I take my time, unless I'm really in a rush, and there's somebody's about to leave, but I take my time. Framing is a total pain, and then I don't really have many pet peeves, but the one that I do have, and I stopped being all humble about it and ladylike when people crop my images. I just immediately text them because it's like, that is all we have as photographers. All we have, well, besides light and subject, is framing. That is it. There's no brushes, texture, there's no mark making, there's no whatever blending of colors. All you have is subject, light, and framing is really what you're doing. So when they get cropped, especially in social media and there's posts, or like somebody tries to make a new composition on the website, it gives me a major headache. And if only people knew how much work goes into framing,
right? The thought behind it.
Exactly. But also not having all that clutter, visual clutter, the distractions, to make it really sort of make impact.
Yeah, it's all about composition. I mean, you're absolutely right. Following certain rules and then breaking them, to make the image more interesting. Yeah.
It's not just photography that influences you and inspires you. It's a multitude of things.
Of course. Yeah. It's culture on the whole. I don't look just at photographers. I go look at painting just as much, and movies, right? There's a shot in FloodZone of the birds on masts that is direct, homage to Hitchcock. And the scene when the birds arrive, Tippi Hedren sits by that school building and it's foggy, and his very frequent motif of this sort of tension between nature and culture, and how it feels like nature might just take over, one thing wrong, and the civilization pushed too far, and there's major revenge. And that's certainly how I feel in Miami. During our hurricanes, you feel very, very small. So that was my homage to Hitchcock. And of course, Tarkovsky, all throughout FloodZone. Tarkovsky, this darkness and moodiness, there's irony, but it's a fairly dark outlook.
So this photograph right here, this is my favorite photograph of the series. I mean, I love them all, but there's something about this that just really resonates with me. And I love that photograph. It's the graphicness of it, the birds in there, and I don't know, it's stunning.
Thank you. Yeah. And, speaking of women photographers, so this is also a reference to Germaine Krull, this German photographer who's incredibly skilled in both commercial photography and her own sort of documentary narrative in Germany in like 1930s. And she photographed this port in Marseille. And I'm a big fan. And I did one of her, breakfast. The breakfast wasn't as great. So this is like me thinking of this 1930s German woman photographer, and Hitchcock. Haven't seen that movie recently. And it's about 6 a.m. on West Coast, Florida. And the birds are really loud. This is one thing that photography doesn't show. They're incredibly loud. And to the point of, it's a tranquil scene, but in fact, it's actually quite ominous.
Has there ever been a photograph that you saw but didn't photograph it because you just knew that it was never going to carry over into the actual material thing? Like you saw the vision in your head, you could see what's going on, but you didn't take the photograph because you're like, you know what, there's no way I can capture that.
Totally. All the time. It's, too much dismay. Yeah. Failed again. Failed again. Failed. Did not get it. And who was it? Stieglitz, right? Alfred Stieglitz and his steerage, the step into modernism, where prior to that, it was all, successionists and it's all texture and sort of emulating painting. And then with Stieglitz, suddenly it's this forms, the shapes, right? It's modernist photography that all sort of align themselves. This alignment, right? The Cartier-Bressonian kind of alignment, right? His moment thing where he had to find the geometry first, and then the movement came along and was captured, right? It was never candid. First, the composition was there, and then the decisive moment, right? And so sometimes these shapes just kind of fall apart and you miss the moment, or, the person left, or the color that evaporated and now it's gone. Or some kind of movement, like dislocation of things all the time, every day.
One of the most beautiful images I ever saw was at night, and it was a blind man with his cane that was walking down the street, and I could hear him coming, the tapping as he was using that cane to figure out where he was at or how he was stepping. But it was the most beautiful image, I swear to God, I've ever seen in my entire life. But there was no way that I was going to be able to capture that experience, that moment. You just can't. It's the same reason why I don't take photographs of sunsets, right? Like everybody loves a good sunset. I'm like, I'd rather just sit here and watch the light change.
Sunsets, right? How many more sunsets?
Right.
we really look at. Yeah.
It's and I can appreciate people's snapshots or, vacation photos, I appreciate them for what they are, but I'd rather just sit there and watch it and take it all in. I had read, or I think actually I saw a video of you talking about FloodZone and talking about a little bit of your history. And then I read it somewhere else in an article. And I got to believe that this definitely comes into play as far as the way you compose things. But for a while, when you were at university in Moscow, you worked as a window decorator, a window dresser. How did that experience, how does that play into your photography, that experience of doing that kind of work for a couple of years?
Definitely. It was said about Walker Evans's work that his pictures have walls. And with mine, there's this shallowness of space. It brings in this element of theatricality, and maybe what you say, what you meant by boldness, it could be that sort of subtle drama created by this set, the fact that it is almost like a mini stage. And that's how I always felt about those windows. So when I got my promotion to work as an interior designer, but prior to that, I worked as a shop window decorator for 2 years to pay for my college in Moscow. And so you learn a lot about composition, having a finite number of objects to work with and having to sort of surprise and seduce the viewer outside, passerby. So that element also, that kind of aesthetic still resonates with me. And with photography, that seduction is so integral because it was always, again, on the border of commerce and art, right? So the surface, when you have, with painting, you have texture, you have like all those other things, the hand, right? But with photography, it's a fairly detached, right, remote surface of that print at best. And now it's just a screen. So you kind of have to go an extra mile to bring the viewer in. So on the formal level, I'm aware of that.
When you did that work, were you working but just by yourself doing it, or did you have other people you were working with and kind of directing? How did that play out?
I was mainly by myself, and there were not big objects. There was some bigger, it was furniture. So I had fabrics and colors, and then there were objects of furniture. And it was really nice brand, very beautiful, not like Baroque, like the rest of Russian stuff. It was minimalist, kind of gorgeous, sculptural. And so I enjoyed that work. And I had, some helpers to move big furniture, but other than that, it was just me.
So very similar process. And when you're doing like the studio work that you do, as far as looking through the camera and then going in and moving stuff around, same thing when you're decorating for a window display, right? You kind
100%.
of
It's exactly the same thing. Yes. In this case, they are sort of, they do become this display, those images, and the images put up on display. All of this, really all my work is metaphorical. Same with Landscape Sublime, images cut up, and shaped for display and consumption, right? And then with FloodZone, there are a lot of images already kind of built in Miami. It's just that it's a very image heavy city, and elsewhere in South Florida too. Tourism, right, or real estate call for particularly appealing kind of commercial imagery. So that's part of the project. It's this meta world. Another great theorist on the subject is Luigi Ghieri, and his cardboard landscapes, these sort of sets, kind of theater, this imagined reality that we live with alongside our experienced reality, right? And it's always in between the two, what we imagine based on the pictures we see and what we actually feel, right, and experience.
You've been working on FloodZone for the last 4 years, is that right?
Yeah.
What was the catalyst for you to start that series? Did you just walk out one day and you saw like the streets flooding and that sort of thing? You were already doing street photography?
I was experimenting. I was shooting daily and not knowing where this was all going whatsoever. It was in part personal challenge to see if I can do observational photography. Like, can I do lyric documentary? Can these be good? Can something new be said? Can I find this, language of my own in this genre that's so sort of historically dense, right? This whole history to lyric documentary, and we know the figures associated with it. Can anything new be said? So shooting, cutting those up, making paintings, making collages, making tableaus with those images, and posting them online, actually on Instagram. And there was this response to the images. So funny how, we still need feedback. Well, definitely, like, I'm not working for myself. I don't want to be doing anything else, but I'm still seeking audience response. And there was a good response. And then, so I had the little archive, and we had one hurricane, the second hurricane, where the second one was actually scary. That was Category 4 Irma. And, climate change, global warming was not on my agenda. It was very speculative, this project. So it found me. And then our street got flooded. We got stranded on this island with my family. And it was, speaking of sublime, the real sublime, it was terrifying. Very. Yes. So there was mandatory evacuation, but we couldn't evacuate. There's no gas left, no flights, nothing. So no power for days. And also afterwards, realizing that certainly you didn't get it worse. There were people who suffered a lot more, and how devastating it could be, and sort of you reached a certain level of fear, right? And trying to protect the son. But then some people lost everything. And that was the motivator. Yeah, that this issue needs attention. And also to sort of channel my own feelings about it. There's a term, climate anxiety, which is quite heavy. And this sort of climate change is called a hyperobject, something so big and so present already that we're having a very hard time comprehending it. Yeah. So think about those things, and channeling the feelings through my images.
It's interesting that we all know about this problem, yet it's like human nature just to kind of pretend like it doesn't exist, right?
Yeah. I was very much interested in that too. And seeing it in myself, I'm still here.
Yeah. How come you're still there?
Still here. I love it.
You love it?
I don't know it's going to be much longer, but I'm used to moving around and I'm loving it for right now. But I know that this is not long term. The problem is, I am fairly mobile, right? And I can pick up my bags and leave, but not everybody can. And so, yeah.
Yeah. What happens if you don't have the means to pack up all your stuff and just move, right?
Yeah. And there's already, climate migration is an issue, climate gentrification. Like Atlanta is running out of water because of all the South Floridians moving into the city. And once you start looking into this whole pattern of what's happening, it can be terrifying, and I have a list of references. Uninhabitable Earth is a fantastic book, not to be read before sleep. Learned it the hard way. But fantastic resource. Yeah.
I read Death at the Grand Canyon the week that I was going to the Grand Canyon. Not a good idea.
No.
Yeah. A lot of anxiety about falling.
Yeah. So it's, and it's like, I'm not a photojournalist. Never was, not interested. Very, very skeptical always about photojournalistic kind of drama, because it tends to depict moments at their most epic state, because that's what sells, right? In photojournalism, like intensified drama. And we know all kinds of issues and even some really comical situations that happened with that, people winning contests and turns out it was botched. So I'm more after a subtle and complex picture because it is a complex problem, right? It is probably all going to be Venice, like you said. But for now, there are some people that cannot move, and you have to sort of prepare this gradual adaptation where people need to have that solid plan B and plan C, right? And then it is gorgeous. It is beautiful. It is weird, but we have this amazing fauna. We have these manatees and these animals, and sometimes it feels like you sort of want them to win. As we all know, Earth, this planet is going to be just fine with all of us flooded and out of the picture. The Earth will survive. We are sabotaging ourselves. So then there are all these like psychological underpinnings that are also very curious in terms of our denial, kind of collective denial perpetuated by all this like imagery that we're constantly fed, right?
Absolutely. And that's what I love about FloodZone is that you're not beating the people over the head with this imagery of like, oh my God, this is a horrible thing. They're beautiful images. And the thought behind them, and obviously people that view them are going to see different things, but the reality of it is that you're highlighting something that is probably going to disappear. It is beautiful. And so that kind of contrast of things decaying and going away, but at the same time, how beautiful it is.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're seeing that. Definitely there's this preemptive nostalgia, if you've been to South Florida. I think people tend to either love it or hate it. I tend to love it. I felt immediately, just fascinating. It's so weird, right? We all know the weirdness of Florida. It's bizarre, but I find all these contrasts really stimulating. It's absurd at times, but it is gorgeous. And, landscape here, water, and incredible, flora. And the things that, like you said, that will be lost. And I'm trying to focus on them. There's some architecture there that I actually photographed several times. It's going to be in the second book as well. It's like certain estate, this historic buildings. I'm in awe with all of that. But also acknowledging that, a lot of South Florida was built very quickly and sort of made for quick consumption and not very long-term thinking.
And yet this climate change is happening and there's all these problems, but yet people are still flocking to Florida. They're still moving to Florida.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? It's the third top third state for inward migration, if not second at this point. With the pandemic, it was a huge wave moving into Florida.
It's interesting. I actually have a love-hate relationship with Florida. When I first went there, I thought, oh my God, I could never live here. It's horrible. And then the last time I was there, and it's been like 5 years or something like that. I was like, you know what? If my house burned down in Colorado right now, I'd be just fine. I just wouldn't care. I'd be happy just living here.
Yeah, well, to me, I didn't take the climate for granted, even though in the summer it's absolute hell. And I think this will be the summer I'm going to try to get away, because every time I'm staying here and I'm always shooting, I can't not work, but in July when I'm walking in the streets and just hating everything in myself and just dying inside, but good exercise. But other than that, yeah, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, I used to live in Florida in Orlando and then Beaufort, South Carolina. And it was just miserable in the summer, just absolutely miserable. Humidity just kills me. So I can feel your pain.
Yeah, it's intense, but it's culturally very interesting. You know, and we have really worthy institutions here that make it, worth staying for. In terms of artists' career as well, as much as I hate that word, but you have to have sort of certain supporters in the face of institutions, artist residencies, this whole network that has to be right, and it's just not available everywhere.
I want to ask you about the thought behind a lot of times when people do a series, they work in either color or black and white, but this series you work in both. What made you decide to do that?
Again, trying to be laconic, because the native space right now with digital is color. We see the world in color. So by turning an image black and white, I'm in a way abstracting it. And often color can be distracting, right? There are certain images that just don't work in color. And so I didn't even overthink it. I just drop color because it's digital and I don't really hide that fact. It's DSLR. I need my mobility, I need to cover a lot of territory. It's in that search. My art is in finding the subject, right, and the light. And then, color and black and white. I think was it Berenice Abbott again who did Changing New York, and there's a combination of color and black and white. So there have been so many precedents already. It's like, I wasn't even thinking twice.
I just kind of wanted to hear your thought process behind that. That image that I really love, and I don't know is there a name for that one with all the birds on the mass? What's it called?
It's called masts.
Oh, it's called mass. Well, there you go.
Straightforward. All of them are very straightforward.
Anyway, I mean, in black and white, that has just a timeless quality to it. I mean, that could have been, photographed 100 years ago for all I know. I mean, just looking at it.
Guess what? It's not black and white. It's color.
It
looks like that because it's basically all monochromatic, but it's color. It's very subtle, warm sepia. And that is from the scene itself. It's an incredibly thick fog. And there's sun glowing sort of through, like somewhere there. It's sunrise, just about sunrise. So, I like doing tricks like that. That one is color.
Yeah, it's stunning. And I had no idea. I thought it was just kind of a sepia toned black and white,
I'm always going for timeless. There are some very sort of explicit, like time stamped images. Like in the new book in Florida, there's like a torn up poster of Trump's face. It's like one time stamp. With FloodZone, there's a photo of, there's like a contemporary boat that got beached, and there's like a wave crashing. There's a bride standing there. So that's my one action shot, and that one is black and white, and that's sort of time stamped. But other than that, I'm aiming for this like timeless quality to images.
Yeah, I think that the cool thing about black and white is it can really change the mood a little bit. It really emphasizes texture, and we don't see in black and white, so it's always interesting to me. And that's the beautiful thing about like when you're shooting landscapes. If the sun is really harsh, just go out and shoot shadows. And so midday shots are great for black and white images because you get that contrast between the light and the dark, the shadows and the light. So that's a great time to go shoot, just with the mindset of like, I'm going to shoot a bunch of shots and then I'm going to just convert them to black and white and play with it. So
Right.
yeah, you have some beautiful black and white. And I'm a huge, as everybody knows, I'm a huge black and white fan. And you have some great black and white images in here. I love.
Thanks.
Do you know off the top of your head roughly how many images you shot to get it down to roughly 80 images for the book FloodZone?
Oh, thousands.
Thousands.
Thousands. Yeah. It's a lot. Editing is not my favorite, so I outsource it.
I feel your pain. It's the one thing I don't enjoy doing, and that's probably most photographers. But culling through thousands or hundreds of images is like,
I could do it for somebody else. I used to do it for my students easily, with your own images, because you've been there, you've felt the feelings, you responded, and some shots are so disappointing especially when they took so much effort, when you're like balancing on your one toe, I shoot with prime lenses. There's a lot of footwork until you find that angle. There's no zooming, so I run around and it's like I'm balancing on a fence on a tiptoe, and then it's disappointing. It's like, it wasn't great. You're like, oh, maybe can I still include it? It was so hard to get. But visually, it's not there.
So when you say you're shooting with prime, what's your 3 primes that you use?
35. What's another one? 70 something, 75, I think. 75 longer, and then 105.
105. Okay.
Yeah. I'm might be lying about 75. And then I have a super wide angle somewhere like 21, which I rarely use.
And then are you a Nikon shooter, Canon, Sony?
Canon. Yeah. I wish they were all lighter, because sometimes like it might get my neck twisted, especially when I'm carrying. Actually, I just came from a shoot. Like this alone is, what is that? 135. This is heavy glass. So like I would plan my shoots and I would leave it out. And then I would go and I have to plan for longer kind of focal lengths type of shoots separately, because I can't just walk around with this thing for 3 hours.
And then as far as the book was concerned, how did that come about? Did you start showing this work, and because you had such great feedback, a publisher came to you, or did you approach them, or did you approach a number of publishers? How did that all come about? Not
in my wildest dreams could I have thought that Steidl was going to go for my book, honestly, because he is the absolute best, right? He's like a legend. And I had my maquette, which changed dramatically since the first iteration. So I had FloodZone. There was a good response. I was getting some press, meaning, there are people interested in contextualizing the work, which is the most important part. I'm not, it's not about press. It's about people willing to contextualize and interpret the work. And that's sort of stage one, a signifier that it's probably a worthy work. So I had a portfolio of about 20 or 30, and then I was expanding, made a little mock-up, showed it to a couple of publishers at an photography fair, and a couple of people were interested. But of course, it's such brutal time for photo book publishers. It's so expensive to make those photo books, and they don't sell for much. Nobody, makes money in photo book publishing, right? Unlike novels. Very different business. So usually contributions on the photographer's behalf are expected, and I don't have that. I wasn't willing to invest, tens of thousands of dollars just to get this work published. So I was waiting on things to just happen naturally, and applying for grants, got a couple grants to continue the work, got invited, and then kind of ghosted by a publisher, which was devastating because it took a whole year of me sort of like hanging there on a little, thread, and being like ready and willing any moment to jump in and do the book. And it was one of the very good publishers. So I was heartbroken after that. And I thought, well, screw this. I don't have anything to lose. And then I met with an editor who said, well, let's propose to Steidl since you have nothing to lose. And Steidl responded within a week, like the next day, that he wanted to publish this book. And I had to sit down, I was dizzy, and it was like all the what's that word? Bodily response to this shocking news. And Steidl does cover your publication. So I had to fly to Germany a couple times, and I was very prepared. Book already expanded. The editor is David Campany, and speaking of social media, that's how we met online. We didn't meet in person. It was like responding to my images, and I would send some more, and just said, "Well, do you want to edit the book?" And he agreed. And so it was not a lot of planning, but I did make my first maquette, and then I did the other maquette. I was working on the book all the time, but it wasn't super strategic, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it sounded like it happened a lot more organic. Yes,
like I'm not a Kickstarter person. I've contributed to one, maybe or two of those with friends, but I'm not. I don't have skills to do that myself, so I didn't want to fundraise. Like, well, if it happens, it happens. If it's not, I'll find other ways to exist. But I love the process, and I'm making another book with Steidl. So.
And this is going to be the newest series, Florida's?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the Florida's book.
Right on. And that's going to be released this year?
Yeah, that's the goal. It's ready anytime.
Oh.
And this is another thing, how do you stop working on a book until you are on the plane? On press, to go on press. I can't stop working on the book. I'm constantly working.
So how much, it sounds like you have your hand in all facets of it. You're working directly with Steidl to do the layout and everything else?
I'm working with the editor. So David Campany is editing this one as well, because he did such a phenomenal job with FloodZone.
Okay.
It was very collaborative, and he's brilliant in editing, especially. He edits, I don't know how he manages to do that, like several dozen photography books a year, only with the work he likes. So, of course, I was honored that, he responded to this work and edited it, and then agreed to edit the next one. And he's an expert on Walker Evans, and a lot of the Florida book is revisitation of Walker Evans. So I'm working through the editor. He does all the editing. I just send him photos, and he does the placement. So the narrative, so he builds up, and that's why it's collaborative. And then it goes to Steidl designer, and then from there it goes on press.
Wow, it's very interesting. I want to talk about social media with you real quick. How has that really helped with your work and discerning like how it should be presented, what series you should be working on at any given time? How has that been for you? It sounds like it's very collaborative, being on Instagram and other social media platforms.
Yeah, I embraced it despite all its shortcomings. And it helped me. I see more sort of benefits to it than drawbacks. When I moved here, when I was actually, one of my students signed me up for Instagram. They said, well, how can you teach contemporary photography and not even use Instagram? And I wasn't. So I signed on. And that was a student who was already like making money off Instagram. And they would, get like free dinners and very versed commercially. So I started posting my breakfasts and then these observational photos from my walks. And by walks, I mean very intense sessions shooting for my potential tableaus and paintings when I moved to Miami. So that's how I started posting the pictures. And just to also, and that transition from being employed pretty much all of my adult life since like college in Russia until teaching position in the States, and then suddenly going freelance. That was the scariest transition I have done. So going freelance, and I had some emotional support from colleagues who transitioned as well. They're like, yeah, it's terrifying for 2 years. You have to get real organized and channel that energy not wasting spending, in the office into your own work, and realize how much administrative work is within your everyday activities. It's not all creative process. It's about maybe 20% if you're lucky. Probably like 10% is actually creative work, but 90% is administrative. So I thought social media would be just part of the administration. So I will post pictures to just sort of for myself to know that I'm doing something, that I'm not just wasting my time. Like, I was getting some commissions, post about those commissions, editorial work, whatever I could get, gallery shows. Yeah. So it's sort of like a journal. I guess it's quite diaristic. I'm not very streamlined with my social media, but it helps in terms of, just kind of like updating people on what I'm doing. I do post almost every day, and I do post new pictures too, when I'm very excited about them, like from the new shoots. So, when people think that I'm not secretive at all, the entire FloodZone was posted on my Instagram before it became a book, which some people thought was insane. Yeah.
So I found you via Facebook. However, the algorithm gods work, I don't pretend to understand it, but I ran across your work and I'm like, oh my God, she's phenomenal. We got to get her on the podcast. So outside Instagram and Facebook, are those pretty much the two social media platforms that you operate on?
Pretty much. I'm not very, not a word person. I enjoy writers, so I follow some writers on Twitter. And Facebook, I don't really use much. It's more for family, I guess. And Instagram is my primary blog. So sometimes I do an extended caption on the image, but usually it's just recent pictures or shows.
So you've gotten commissions through Instagram, correct?
Yeah. I mean, that's how I met David Campany, who's the editor of the book. He saw Instagram pictures and a whole lot of other things, curators from galleries who invited me to do shows. It's pretty good if you use it wisely, I think. But it's a huge distraction too, so I try not to use it that much. I post something
and then get off.
Like people that I actually care about, and I get off. Yeah.
And you've done some editorial work because of some of these series, like FloodZone. You did some work for Bloomberg, right?
Yeah. I love those commissions. Again, part of that transition was just figuring out, means to have income too. So reaching out to editors for possible commissions. Bloomberg sent me on several shoots, and all the aerial images you see in FloodZone are from Bloomberg's helicopters. So I got onto helicopters for them first time without a door. I had a very long lens. We had to remove my door. So I thought I was going to die for photography that day, but we survived.
It's pretty exciting though, right?
It was really exciting. I love it. I would do it any day.
Do you ever consider doing drone work? Getting a drone and shooting?
Yeah, I would rather go on the helicopter, I think. I've seen some good results with drones, but they always seem a bit robotic to me, and I love the experience. And it's all about framing. You can see it on the screen. I don't know, maybe I'd warm up to it, but I like to be in the air for sure.
I'm with you. I have a drone. I'd much rather have my DSLR in my hand and composing than flying a machine in the air and composing. It has its virtues, but I don't know. There's something about I'm a still photographer, I'm not a videographer. I'm not a drone photographer. I'm a still photographer. And whether it be a film camera or my DSLR, that's where I feel most comfortable, I guess.
Yeah.
The first book has already sold out, correct? FloodZone?
I think so. I never know, and then it pops up somewhere. I'm like, oh, it's still there. Once it's in Steidl's hands, they control it. I don't know where it's going. I have some copies and I give them all away. Most of them are given away. So I don't have any left.
I'm laughing with you because I'm the same way. I have a book and I end up giving them all away. And like I just gave my last copy away last week, and I'm like, oh crap! Now I gotta run down some other copies, or I gotta wait till the next run to get another copy.
Yeah, well, the whole point of this, is for the project to live on and for me to hopefully continue the work, or work of similar nature. FloodZone is ongoing, so I'm actually the next iteration of that project and hopefully book would be the Atlantic coast, up the East Coast, and I already have some locations from it. There's South Carolina, Georgia, even Virginia, Delaware. So I have it all mapped out. And it's always, with freelance work, it's dependent on grants and so on, commissions. There's Fire Zone, and I already started working on that, also with Bloomberg. And so that's California, and it was supposed to be my 2020, but pandemic. So I started that. It's tricky, 2 states that were never meant to be for long-term living, Florida and California. And then, of course, now I have Florida. That's less focused on the environment, although that's a prominent chapter and more on this sort of linkage to history of the state, in this current condition.
Well, I think the bottom line is that you do phenomenal work, and that's why you are who you are and where you are at the moment, right?
Thank you. Just working.
You got to put in the work. That's the bottom line. If you're going to do it, you got to do it well. And there's sacrifice, and it's not an easy road, but it also has its pros. It affords you a fair amount of freedom to do what you love. And it doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah, it really doesn't. I don't take it for granted at all. It's the best. It's the best. But it is a lot of hard work, but it's the work I enjoy most, and I wouldn't want to do anything else.
So can you address the whole subject of grant writing and support of how do you look for a grant, and what specifics are you looking for when you're applying?
Oh, there are lists of grants for artists and photographers online, and I frequent at least 3-4 websites. Where I check for deadlines. Some people go as far as like having an entire Excel spreadsheets, and I'm always very appreciative when those artists share them with me. Friend artists, there's this network, deadlines, grants, commissions, reaching out to editors for possible pitches on, stories, locations. So all of that combined, but my primary support comes from my galleries. Thankfully, I arrived at a point where I have 5 galleries now. And with photography, the best part is that, of the editions is while it's not maybe as valued monetarily as much as like sculpture, right? Other monumental arts. It's also available, in my case, in the edition of 5. So I can distribute the same image among my galleries. And that's what enables parallel shows in Madrid and Amsterdam and Vienna. And then like in the summer was Miami and Frankfurt, and then New York. So all of that made possible by those editions. And the galleries then sell the prints. So that's how it works. In a way, I'd like for all of my income just to be galleries selling my prints, because then I don't have to think about sales at all. But commissions and grants is still part of the overall picture.
What percentage would you put on for that, for editorial and grants?
Not so much editorial, because barely any editors know me. I had like 3 editors know me, 2 from Bloomberg and one from New York Times, to be honest. They're great editors. There's so many more photographers, right, than there are jobs, vastly more. So it's not a big percentage editorial work. Grants, I try, grants, commissions, sometimes. I can't really break it down to percentage. Every year is different. One year I had those 3 big commissions from Bloomberg. And then last year there was nothing. But then I had print sales that were fine.
So the key is really to diversify your income stream.
100%. Yeah, definitely.
And with these galleries, this gallery representation that you have now, did the vast majority of those folks reach out to you, or were you in with a gallery and then other people heard about you? How did that come about?
Yeah, mainly reaching out. I've gone through this period where I was actively reaching out and trying to, establish these connections, sort of collaborations. With Landscape Sublime, I had a gallery in New York, and then they closed. And with FloodZone, I was sort of set thinking, oh, this is never going to sell. I shouldn't even bother. But once Steidl wanted to publish the book, I thought, well, maybe some of those prints. So I reached out to a few galleries in New York and had some meetings. They're always skeptical when it's the artists reaching out, even though later on you think, don't you wish you had me now? It's like the same. Sometimes I have these feelings now with museums because some of the editions are sold out. And, I'm like, oh, don't you wish you bought it for a lot less? And I wish this museum had it, but remember, I didn't care. This was like overcoming some sort of being ignored at some point. And then now I have a German gallery. They found me through the book. So they saw the book and wanted to do a show and represent. Then I have a Miami gallery, came through a curator. Then I have an Amsterdam gallery, came through a collector who visited my studio in Miami and then spread the word. And then I had the Amsterdam galleries lined up and I chose one. And then I have a gallery in Madrid that came through an institutional show in Florida. And then, so they saw this institutional museum. My museum solo was last year. It was my first with FloodZone. And they saw the work there. And now they have physical work in the show in Madrid. And then I have one in Asheville. And she was the director of a prominent gallery in New York City, a photography gallery, well established, and branched out and opened her own space in Asheville. So there's that. Yeah. Fine.
Nice. So when you set edition numbers, what do you typically set them at a specific number, or does it depend on the image?
Yeah, within the series, it's usually a specific number. So within FloodZone, they're all editioned at 5 plus 2 artist proofs. And there's different price points, but they start out and then they get higher. And so that to encourage, those early sales, and then APs, artist proofs, are reserved for institutions.
Nice.
Because I'm still emerging. And so it's in my own interest to have the work placed in institutions.
Yeah. You've been fortunate too to have a number of residencies. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the latest one was Oolite Arts, or formerly known as Art Center South Florida. That's run by Dennis Scholl, whom we already mentioned. It was a great residency, 2 years, free studio in Miami Beach, and all kinds of great opportunities that came through that. Yeah, I really miss that one. I'm on my own right now, and I'm certainly missing the community. So you have to also keep reaching out to people and do studio visits on your own.
Yeah, I was going to ask you talk about some of the benefits of having artist residency, what it brings to the table for the artist.
If it's a good one, it can bring just tremendous resources. Well, first you have this peer group, so you always have people to talk with about your work, brainstorm, and then if it's well staffed, there are usually lists again of opportunities for artists, so grants. Most beneficial part of residency that I found, for myself, were studio visits with curators and other, workers in the cultural sector from outside the city, especially when you're not located centrally. And unfortunately, it's still very much concentrated in New York City in terms of the arts and opportunities. Then having that exchange with curators coming from all over, as opposed to just your cities, is critical, because of course we all know that institutions tend to Import artists for shows predominantly. Local artists is seen as local artists, even if you are exhibiting all over the world. In my case, I'm exhibiting 80% in Europe and elsewhere, as opposed to the States. But here, I'm a local artist. So you have to bring people from other places.
Last but not least, if there's a young person in art school or in some kind of art program somewhere across the world listening to our conversation, and wanting to be a full-time artist, do you have any advice that you would give that young person?
Oh, so much advice. Decide that you truly cannot be doing anything else. Like, this is it. Because making it as an artist, the chances are so low. Just being realistic about it. Most artists, vast majority, have other income, right? It's either teaching or commercial work, or other things. It could be a day job, and then you're doing art on site. To expect to become a full-time artist, it's so precarious, especially in photography, right? Again, unless you have like a very successful commercial practice on the side, or editorial photography doesn't pay that well. Commercial photography, decent. But just be very realistic with yourself. And then if you're completely set on it, and by realistic, I mean like look at show business. I think it's similar to that in terms of making it. You're essentially making something that nobody needs, really. It's extra. And then you cannot be mediocre at it. That's another problem. So you have to constantly strive for this improvement, right? And perfecting and sort of competing against yourself all the time. It can be exhausting, and you have to grow very thick skin, and rejection hurts still. It won't stop. You can get better at it, but if you're not getting rejected often enough, that means that you're not trying hard enough. That's the one thing I learned. You get rejected, apply to 2 more things, reach out to 3 more people, and you never know. I learned a lot when I moved here from my friend who's an editorial photographer, like a beast in editorial photography, where she said, how are you not reaching out to people? How do you expect it all just come to you? Yeah, you have to reach out to editors. They're not expected to just know of you. So make that phone call, And another person was actually a friend. She has her very successful interior design business, total self-starter. And the same thing, you have to reach out. And sometimes, sure, things will happen naturally. You can never be, you can't put too much expectation, on that other end of that email or whatever, phone call. So if it's not happening, then it's not happening. But you do have to put effort into having that network, people around you. It's all collaboration, essentially, in the arts. I think that would be my very long advice.
I think that's fantastic advice.
Yeah.
Anna, thank you so much for taking the time with us this evening and talking with us, and not only about your work, but giving all this great advice and talking about what you do. I really appreciate the time that you've taken with us and time that you spent away from your family. So, that's the most precious thing we have is time. And so I really can't thank you enough. It was very generous of you.
Thank you. Thank you. I had a great time. Thank you for the great questions. Gotta go. My son and my cats, 10 p.m. This is the proof.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I love your stuff. It's phenomenal. I'll continue to follow what you're doing, and maybe we'll have you on again. Just do a follow-up. That'd be fun.
Oh, great. Yeah. Thank you so much.
You bet.
For the Tenant Podcast, I'm Todd Pearson.
And I'm Wes Brown.
Have a great
week.